Ben, welcome to the Catholic Creatives podcast. Thank you so much for joining. This is a podcast where we interview all of the members of the Catholic Creatives movement and group. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dude, you are an awesome artist. For all the people that are out there that don't know about your art, we've been buddies for a long time. I wanted to sort of just like from the outset say your art is crazy. Like in the Catholic world where most stuff is butterflies and Jesus holding a lamb, running across one of your pieces definitely makes you feel a little bit different. Can you tell the people out there who are not familiar with your art, like what you usually like to paint?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I guess my favorite thing to do is to not make kitschy art. That's just awful. So when you talk about butterflies and little lammies running through meadows, kind of makes me cringe a little bit, because art, especially deeply theological art, is meant to convey ideas and emotions. And Catholicism is filled with lots of ideas and emotions and brutal things, loving things, glorious things. But I love to paint, in particular, portraits that might lack form as we know it, but it's not lacking human emotion. So when you see a piece, it's meant to draw up a feeling rather than be immediately recognizable as a lamb or
Right.
a crucifix. So it's meant. I'm questioning people through my art. I'm questioning their depth, and I'm questioning the fact: have they dealt with mortality? So everything I do, I'm trying to question mortality. Have you come to grips with the fact that you're a hopeless sinner who's going to die?
Which is not a very comfortable thing for people to feel. Like, I feel like your art is sort of like the death metal of Catholic media. I mean, like, let's not mince words. You paint dead people and like skeletons and really, really ugly stuff that's really brutal. I mean, what has been people's reception to that? Like, how do people receive it when they see you put up a new piece that's like just really like horrifying?
Yeah, it's a good way to weed out superficial people in my life. I know that if like somebody has seen my art and they're still talking to me, that means like that we're probably friends. Because it is uncomfortable and some of it's very grotesque, and I've received lots of different responses, but some people say, "Wow, you really made me think," and other people are like, "Wow, that's art." And those are the people who usually tend to like beautiful imagery. They'd like to look at a Monet or a Rembrandt, although some Rembrandts can be pretty dark as well. But they're just they gravitate towards more of a resurrection Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, so your art is definitely it's gripping because it's violent, and it makes me think about, a very violent writer like Flannery O'Connor, who is very Catholic in her worldview and has been a champion of Catholic uh, literature. But obviously, like when you first read a Flannery O'Connor, it's I mean, it doesn't make you feel good. Um, I think that she's trying to galvanize us, right? And in a similar way, I feel like when I've seen your stuff, it's really galvanized me, like really made me think about my own mortality. What like made you decide to start painting that way and drawing that way?
Um, well, first of all, like I never drew anything until late in college. And then I had to go through this process of actually learning how to draw. But in that process, I I guess I just kind of was dealing with an existential crisis in my own life, where my life was becoming increasingly chaotic and confusing and tumultuous. And so um, at first I was just expressing what I was feeling. And as I evolved as a person and kind of gained back a sense of who I was, I turned my painting on the public, on the viewers. Um, so instead of reflecting my own emotions, I started almost looking for a rise. Um, I wanted to challenge my viewers, just like you mentioned Flannery O'Connor does. Also, certain Jack London stories really do that too. Um, he's kind of my favorite author.
That's awesome.
If you've ever read The Sea Wolf, it's like a Nietzschean manifesto.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you're painting those. It certainly goes. It flies in the face of Nietzsche in that, like, it's deeply spiritual, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah. And that's, I think, it's easy for definitely Christians, but even some Catholics, uh, obviously, to think that I'm being Nietzschean, or to think that I'm being like anarchist.
mhm.
But it's direct. It's not purely to get, it's not futurism. It's not to get your rise for the sake of pissing you off. It's to get your rise so that you think about who you are as a human being. And Nietzsche didn't really care. He thought, if you could conquer your morality or whatever, you were the ultimate man. But I'm trying to say you need to face your morality, acknowledge your flaws, and I hope this painting makes you think about yourself.
Yeah,
It certainly made me think about myself over the past few years. So,
right. And so for those who don't know you, like, there is a um, it's it's interesting how that content, like the painting that you've done and your creative outlet, has turned into a career. Very strange career path. Uh, what are you doing now, and how did your art get you there?
um, my wife coined this term, when your vocation leads to death. Um, or when you die to yourself, you lead to death. It's kind of like this thing we chuckle about in my family. But I'm a mortician. I'm an apprenticed mortician in Miami, and me using my art to deal with my mortality over the last few years has led me to the vocation of dealing with death on a daily basis. Um, and I feel like definitely my art is reflected in my daily work. Uh, and it's, my career choice is just, it's equally as horrifying to some people as my paintings. You have a lot of people just, what? What are you, I mean, what are you doing? That's gross. It's not gross. Christ was in a tomb. Somebody had to put him there. So um, it's been kind of an interesting couple of years here, working towards that. So
Yeah. So what exactly does that entail? I mean, what is a day-to-day like embalmer slash mortician do? And like, why is that creative and why is it meaningful to you?
yeah, it's a it's a life issue for me. Um, it's really easy for people to shut their loved ones out of their life and their mind once they pass away. But a human body holds intrinsic dignity. Um, Obviously, it was made in the image and likeness of God. And some things that embalmers do are, they come across as slightly barbaric, just in the restorative process. You're, I don't know if everybody knows what embalming entails, but
Probably not.
you're basically ripping open an artery and draining out blood and replacing it with formaldehyde. Um, but I've noticed that my art comes out, that minimalistic art comes out when I'm restoring a body, because I like to do as little as possible to it, keep it as simple as possible so that it looks natural. That's kind of a big deal when families view at wakes. They don't want to see something that doesn't look like their loved one.
Yeah.
So the grotesqueness of my art comes out in the embalming process, because embalming is a grotesque thing, but the simplicity comes out when I'm restoring. So, but yeah, I work in a high volume mortuary, so I'm dealing with, you know, several cases a day. Just myself. There's several morticians at this facility. We see tons and tons of families and people every day. So.
Mhm. So that's I definitely want to ask many more questions about that. But now that people have that kind of like, all right, so you're an artist that does like work with the dead. I want to go back to, growing up and just sort of like general faith questions and
Mhm.
just ask, what was the genesis of your both experience as a child learning spirituality and how did you come to faith in your life?
Sure. Yeah. My childhood was, it can be described as a little bit monastic, in the sense that my family life was very regimented, and it was, I thought, beneficial looking back at it. I was homeschooled for the first 10 years of my life.
Nice. Me too.
Yeah. My mom and dad's motto in our schoolroom was "Ora et labora," which is the famous Benedictine motto of pray and work. And that discipline was instilled in me. That Benedictine monasticism came out. I swam every morning on a swim team competitively, and then studied. And um, it wasn't until really college that um, my discipline kind of went wayward. Um, yeah, it
Isn't
wasn't.
that true for all of us? You know.
Yeah. It was easy to just stop regulating myself. Um, I was, you know, I was at Ave Maria University with your brother. Um, he could probably tell you plenty of crazy stories. But I guess that loss of discipline for me led me away from my faith for a while. Um, I never abandoned Catholicism or anything. I just wasn't very. I wasn't a serious prayer. I wasn't a very serious. It was obligatory,
Hmm.
and I just felt like I was in a desert, and my life became increasingly chaotic until I ended up, committed in a psychological ward down in New Orleans because I had just lost all control. And it was there that I was able to recommit myself to monastic discipline. Uh, Went back to Colorado, and that's really when I really dedicated myself to my artwork. Um, and I really asked myself tough questions about who I was and why I was here. And um, and now I'm a mortician.
Yeah. Um, what did your art, like, what role did your art play in your return to faith?
when you when you're in the creative process and you're kind of following that vein of abstract expressionism, it's really easy to move in such a way that you kind of just let your emotions flow, and you get kind of carried away, and it's like almost this mania that comes out, and you're just releasing all this stuff out of you. And um, for me to be able to do that in a healthy way with artwork instead of whatever other way people do that is it allowed me to start to evaluate. First, I evaluated my my drawings and paintings, and I said it was more objective. I was like, well, this is good art, this is bad art. But as I kind of honed my skill, I started to look at my own emotions that I was conveying, and I started to really grapple. I started to really wrestle with what I was dealing with, like what I was feeling. And um, when I came to the realization that it was okay to feel those things and to express them, it was at that point that I didn't feel so far away from God anymore. Um,
What were you
I
feeling that you were afraid to express?
just incredible despair and rage, and just I felt worthless. Really, I was battling with this idea of what am I really worth. I haven't. I came from this train of thought that I needed to like contribute to society in such a deep way that if I wasn't able to do that, I was just like a waste of space. And as I painted and expressed emotions, and others started to see that, I felt like I was teaching people around me that it was okay for them to express emotion too.
Mm.
And so I became almost like a pedagogue in my art. And yeah, I kind of obsessed over it. It was all I talked about. I was painting like 15 pictures a day. I have like, a stack of like hundreds of paintings in my parents' basement in Colorado because I just don't know what to do with them. Um, and that was when like the catharsis really started to happen, and I felt like, to use the Lenten term, I felt like I was walking out of the desert back into the church.
Mm.
And then really mortuary school and apprenticeship was just like a refined vocation. I just needed to find a place where I could do that all the time. And selling art for a living it's very difficult. So this was like a perfect fit. Just feel like I go to work and I die a humble death every day by serving these dead people, Uh,
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned Lent. That's literally why I wanted to interview you in this, because Lent is a season of like looking at yourself, right? And with violence, cutting off the parts of ourselves um, that are not fitting to God, like cutting off our sin and our weakness and our fears. Um, and that can be a very, very scary thing. Um, it's it's almost like, it's one thing to just say, I'm going to give up something for Lent. It's another thing to really like use that and look at yourself and say, I'm so weak, I can't even give this up. Like, you know, like to feel just the weakness of our own will, and our own need for comfort, and our fear of, humiliation and all of those things of being left out because of what we're giving up. Um, all of this to say that it's such a time for us to look at ourselves and look at our mortality and look at, you know our need for God, and that's something that you're doing every day with your vocation. I wanted to hear more about like what how does that affect you being so close to death? um, how do you approach God, and like how is that a spiritual thing for you?
yeah, kind of at first when I first started a little over a year ago doing this, um, I would encounter someone who had passed away, uh, and at first my prayer was like almost not shallow, but just, I guess my prayer was kind of kitschy, really. I would see like this person who had died, and I would just pray like, Lord, don't let me die this way. Um, and as I saw more dead people, got more comfortable with it, I started to realize you can really tell who was at peace when they passed and who was like in just utter, just freak out chaos. Um, I say, that person died well or that person did not die well. That I feel like you can pretty much tell based on their body language. And so my prayer became more um, specific in the sense that I wasn't just trying to avoid a particularly painful looking death, but rather, you take me however you want, but let me die well. Let me die humbly and ready to face you in judgment,
Mhm.
which is a lot different than, Lord, don't let me die that way.
Do you
Uh,
when was the moment that you remember thinking that? When was the first time you thought that?
um, I guess it was an interesting thing. It was when I had been called to a hospice unit to pick up this old man who, by all accounts, he was just not a very nice person. Um, the nurses said he was just like the worst patient to deal with, and um, he kept asking for stuff, and when he died, they had kind of left him alone for a while because he was so tough to deal with. Um, and he had been propped up with all these pillows. But by the time they had realized he had expired, the rigor had kind of set in, and he was stiff. He was sitting up. He was stuck that way. Um, and that was like the first time I had really seen a person who had not died well. Um, he just looked. There was just a horrified look in his eyes, on his face, and it was right then it erased any painful death I had encountered or witnessed from my mind. I was just like, that's all I need to avoid that.
Yeah.
I need to avoid that horror. So if I die humbly and I'm with Christ, not against him, and I think like asking Our Lady of Mount Carmel in particular, for graces at death is powerful just because of her promises of her scapular. Um, that's all I ask. It could be a car wreck or cancer or whatever it is. Just if I can have a dialogue with Christ as I die, then that's all I want. And to see that horrified man who was so far from God, that's when my prayer changed.
Hmm. Have you read The Death of Ivan Illich?
I have. I have. It was. It's very important to my profession. I always recommend it to my fellow morticians because there's superficial morticians out there too.
Yeah, I believe that. Although it sounds kind of strange um, to be
Yeah,
official about that. But in the book or the novella, it's very similar. It's about a man who is a horror to everyone that he's with, to his family, to his friends, to his wife, and is deeply selfish, um, and goes through the process of dying and becoming completely helpless. And until the last very kind of end, he's fighting it, right? Like
yeah,
he's just he's acting out in complete selfishness, anger, and regret and shame, and um, it's really horrifying, right? Like
yeah,
to be brought through the process of death that way, and to see yourself in it. Like when I first read it, it broke my heart because um, I just saw in myself so many of those tendencies to like to be angry and hurt other people out of my own pain, uh,
Yeah,
and to not like um, to not accept suffering, you know, like not to look at it as a gift, to like resent it and um, to be angry about it, honestly. Um,
yeah,
I feel like the release of anger, you know, in suffering is actually a very difficult thing to do, but it's part of like the freedom of the cross and the freedom that we as Christians or Catholics have. Um,
yeah, yeah. No,
uh,
I totally agree with you. It's the dying to yourself every day. Um, in that act of humility, you achieve freedom. Um, but some people don't do that every day, and so it happens on their deathbed. Hopefully, either way, like humility and courage are probably like the two virtues that you need most on your deathbed. And courage to face your maker and humility to face your maker. Really, that's all you have. Like that's the only thing left.
yeah. How does that change the way that you live? I mean, you've talked about like how to die. I mean, in your daily life when you're not literally dying, how does that spirituality become adapted?
Um, it has really simplified my whole family's dealings, as far as like my wife and how we deal with our son and our dog. And she and I have been on this quest to to simplify our lives, because if you're if you're living your life knowing that you're going to meet your maker at any moment, it's nice to keep things simple. You don't want to clutter your thoughts with unnecessary things. Um, and so it actually makes us feel like we're living out the vocation of Adam and Eve, like in the garden. Um, Obviously, they failed, but the Garden of Eden is really a minimalistic place. Every need was taken care of, and other than that, it was just them being present with God. So it's like that monastic upbringing returned. Um, it's just it's really like gotten rid of a lot of materialistic tendencies in our lives.
Like what? What was one thing that you guys did started doing differently to simplify?
Like I really like to be well dressed. Um, it's like it's always been something that I like to look good, and like just like reducing my clothing and wardrobe down to only what I need. That's been like a major step I've taken. Or like I love to cook. I love to cook elaborate things. Like making a certain amount of meals every week, just about like substance rather than like beauty.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what is the purpose of food? What is the purpose of clothing? Um, what is the what's the purpose of all this stuff? You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, we don't have cable. We don't have any of this stuff. Really, we have Spotify because like music is experiential. It helps us transcend and be with God. Um, but really, like I got rid of social media for like 6 months. It was really awesome. Then I got back on, and I feel crappy again, so I can't get back
Don't we
on.
all? Don't we all?
Yeah, so just like little stuff, little stuff. Like I had I feel ashamed mentioning this, but I had like 16 pairs of shoes, man. Like, what do you need 16 pairs of shoes for? You
I don't
know?
know. I don't know, but
Yeah, it was getting overwhelming.
mhm.
So to be more simple is to be less frivolous and more frugal, and there's all sorts of benefits.
Yeah, yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, the last kind of closing questions I want to sort of be takeaways for people to apply this spirituality that you're living every day. You know, the memento mori spirituality, the Lenten spirituality. What is one concrete thing that you think people can do um, to keep a remembrance of their own mortality in front of them outside of buying one of your paintings?
Yeah, and hanging it prominently on their wall, stare at every day. No, I think like there's certain devotions that are really helpful for me. Praying the sorrowful mysteries. Obviously, I mentioned earlier the scapular, um, and Our Lady of Mount Carmel and her promises. And I guess I would recommend reading The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and working on developing devotion to the mystic saints, because they experience Christ in every person of the body of Christ in death and life. So when you see a dead person or when you're dying, think, hopefully you can recall that and feel like you can rely on somebody like Mother Teresa to help you from heaven. But I think, yeah, like cultivating a relationship with the mystics, and really meditating on the sorrowful mysteries, and trying to reduce clutter in your home. Just go through your house, and if you don't need something, don't hold on to it for sentimental reasons. Just get rid of it, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't. So I guess that's like my advice.
That's good. You said one thing that I really want to come back to, which is the the idea of seeing the body of Christ, um, or the person of Christ in every person. What does that mean to you as a mortician? Like, and how does that change the way that you see your job?
Yeah. I just a couple weeks ago, I posted a picture by Holbein, the famous painter, um, and it's Christ in his tomb. And that's not really an image that many painters have painted. And when I saw it, it immediately struck me, because it's very clear that he was aware of what a corpse looks like. It's kind of these gnarled, gangrenous hands and black skin, and in particular, like Christ's eyes were deeply haunting for me, because when you see someone who's dead and their eyes are still open, they're hollow. Um, the soul really does justice to a person's eyes. Like, it's what animates you and makes you look alive. And so when you see a dead person and you see a picture of Christ who was dead for 3 days, it really hits home for me. Like, wow, this person has had the same fate as my Savior. And they're going to continue to have the same fate if they lived within him. They're going to rise again. And so when I go into work and deal with, there's this famous story about Mother Teresa, how this man went to volunteer for her, and as he was bathing this homeless man, the man turned into Christ, and Mother Teresa looked over to him and said, I see that you see him too. And like that's what I want to bring to the death care industry. I want people to see Christ in their loved one. I want to treat everybody that I take care of just like I would treat my Savior if I were Joseph of Arimathea. How did he take care of Jesus Christ? That's how I want to take care of every person I encounter. So that's why the mystics are so important to me.
Wow. I don't even know what to say to that, man. That's struck me. Yeah, I'm really touched by that. That ministry to the dead as the body of Christ. When you're speaking to a lot of different artists, creatives in different industries, I think a universal experience of the artist is a sense of being, what is my use? You know, like a lot of times we all have felt at certain moments in our lives a sense of like, I don't do numbers. I'm not going to be a business, guru or something. Like I'm an artist. Where do I fit in? And it sounds like you had an experience of that in your life before you kind of found your outlet for creativity. What's the piece of advice that you would give to someone right now who is in a place in their lives where they don't quite know where they fit or know where their creativity is going to be like, their vocation? What piece of advice would you give that person?
I would say, firstly, step back and look at your content. What am I conveying through my various branch of art? And can I use it to instruct society? And society, that sounds really broad and scary. We don't need to all be, painting the Sistine Chapel, or writing epic poetry, but we can be rabbis to those who are immediately around us. And our art can be the method of teaching. So if you're just making art for the sake of making art, you're missing the point. You don't need to use your art to go necessarily lead a conference or something, but you can't, or it doesn't need to be published, but you can directly influence those, that most inner circle in your life. And that's how the best teachers operate, in my experience, in my life. All of my best teachers have operated by instructing those closest to them. And so you can use your artwork to do that. That would be my recommendation.
That's awesome. That's great advice. Well, I want to include, links to some of the stuff that you've done in the show notes here, but if there's anything else that you want people to if there's any way that people want to get, in touch with you or find your art, where would they do that? How would they do that?
You can add me on Facebook, Benjamin W. Graebner. I also have Instagram, Kodiak Graebner, and you can Google me, and there will be a link that comes up for a pretty awesome blog site for people who deal with mental illness. And I was featured on that blog that has a lot of my work. And you can write me a letter, and I can send you a painting if you want, or a drawing. So you can include my address if you want.
That's awesome. Okay.
I've been trying to write letters to people lately. So old school, old school letters, like Benjamin Franklin style. So.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, thanks so much for getting on the show, and I hope to see people getting in touch with you and learning to adopt some of your monastic spirituality through that. Can't wait to catch up with you later and have more talks about these experiences. It's really really beautiful.
Yeah. Thanks for interviewing me.
All right, Ben. Well, I will talk to you later, brother.
All right. God bless.